The fire crackled in front of me, throwing twisted shadows across the red dirt floor. The air was heavy, not like before an ordinary storm, but as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The witch doctor stood only a few meters from the church, his bare feet covered in dust and dried blood. He held bones in his hands while murmuring words I couldn't understand, yet I could feel their weight pressing into my chest. Behind me, I heard a child's muffled crying, the kind that doesn't come from pain, but from fear. The man lifted his eyes and stared at me with a calm that didn't belong to an ordinary person. His lips moved slowly, and his voice came out low, but loaded with a disturbing certainty. This land never belonged to your God. In that moment, my whole body wanted to step back. My mind screamed that I was alone, that maybe I had gone too far. But there was something stronger than fear inside me, something I couldn't explain, only obey. That was the night I learned darkness only seems unbeatable until light decides to show up. My name is Adewara Deem, and what happened in that remote village in Nigeria didn't just change my life. It changed the destiny of a man who had devoted his existence to the darkness. And it all began long before that confrontation. I was born in a village where fear wasn't an emotion, it was an inheritance. As a child, I learned there were places you couldn't walk after sunset. I learned certain trees should never be touched. I learned there were names you never spoke out loud. But what marked me most were not the stories, it was the sounds. At night, while other children slept, I heard the drums. Families consecrated their own children in rituals, where blood was poured out like a spiritual language. Animals were sacrificed under the moon. Masked men walked through the streets at night, carrying symbols that represented alliances no one dared to break. Anyone who refused to participate was treated as a traitor. Some disappeared. Others were simply erased from the village's collective memory. In that land, darkness didn't need to hide because no one dared challenge it. I grew up believing that was the only world possible, until the day a man came into the village with something I had never seen before. It wasn't his clothes, it wasn't his voice, it was his peace. He walked like someone who carried no fear inside him. His eyes didn't avoid people. He didn't avoid the places everyone avoided. He spoke about a God who didn't demand blood, but offered life. And for the first time, I saw something that looked stronger than the fear that ruled that land. When I accepted his message, I lost almost everything. My father didn't speak to me for weeks. Friends crossed the street so they wouldn't have to pass by me. Some looked at me like I had betrayed not only my family, but the entire history of our people. The loneliness wasn't only social, it was spiritual. There were nights I asked myself if I had made a mistake. Nights when the silence seemed to confirm my worst fears, but there was something that kept calling me back. Years later, when I returned to that region as a pastor, I knew exactly what I would find. Fear was still there. The rituals were still happening. The spiritual control was still visible. But I also knew something I didn't know as a child. A territory can belong to darkness for generations. But that doesn't mean light can't reclaim it in a single night. I started small, helping families, bringing food, praying for the sick, slowly earning trust. The leaders allowed me to stay, not because of faith, but because it was convenient. At first, few people came to the services. Many came only for the material help. Faith wasn't desired, it was tolerated. The village carried an invisible oppression. There was violence for no reason, children who didn't smile, men who lived with empty eyes. It was as if something had drained hope out of that place long before I arrived. I prayed every night, asking God to shine there. Some believers warned me. They said others had tried before. They said that was enemy territory. They said the throne of darkness was established there. Some suggested I should leave, but something inside me wouldn't allow it. Because sometimes God doesn't call you to where it's safe. He calls you to the exact place where your faith must stop being theory and become survival. And that was where everything began to change. In the beginning, our services were small, so small that sometimes the sound of crickets outside felt louder than our own voices. We were few, very few, men too tired to believe change was possible, women used to surviving, not hoping, children who had learned too early that fear was part of life. There was no stage, no structure, just a small improvised wooden shelter with a metal roof that groaned whenever the wind passed through. And still, every night we gathered there, we prayed, we sang, we waited. But for months, nothing seemed to change. People came, listened, and went back home carrying the same fear they brought. The spiritual weight of that region was too old, too deep, until something unexpected started with the children. I noticed they carried the most fear. Their eyes were always alert, their bodies tense, as if they were constantly waiting for something bad to happen. So I began teaching them something simple, not a complex doctrine, not a theological explanation. An molitva, a prayer. I gave each of them one verse of scripture, one verse they could carry with them when fear came during the night. Psalm 4:8. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. I told them whenever they felt afraid, they should repeat those words, not like a magic formula, but as a reminder they were not alone. And they began repeating it in their beds, in the dark, in homes where for generations only silence and fear had slept side by side. And something began to change. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Parents began to notice their children slept better, that they no longer woke up crying in the middle of the night, that there was a new peace inside their homes, a peace that couldn't be explained. Sometimes the first sign of a revival doesn't come with fire, it comes with silence. The silence of a fear that finally lost its voice. So families started watching. Some, in secret, began removing the spiritual objects they had kept their whole lives. Amulets disappeared from doorways, symbols stopped being displayed on walls. No one talked about it publicly, but something was happening. A man named Jinedu was one of the first miracles we witnessed. For 15 years, he had carried a sickness that no healer, no ritual, and no treatment had been able to cure. His body was weak, his eyes empty of hope. We prayed for him for weeks. Nothing happened at first, but one morning he walked into the church by himself. No help, no support. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw something that hadn't been there before. Life. The news spread quickly. Conversions began to happen. Young people who had avoided the church started coming. Elderly people who had spent decades trapped in fear began to listen closely. The atmosphere in the village began to change. The air felt lighter. People smiled more. But not everyone watched that with joy, because as the light began to grow, something in the darkness began to wake up too. One afternoon, when I arrived at the church, I found bones scattered in front of the entrance, still fresh, arranged with intention. And standing there in front of them was him, the witch doctor. His eyes were fixed on me, no anger, no rush, only certainty. "You opened a door that should never have been opened," he said, his voice so calm it was more unsettling than any shout. I stayed silent. He stepped closer. "The spirits of this land are watching you," I answered without raising my voice. "Then they will see there is a power greater than them." He tilted his head slowly and smiled, because when the light starts moving forward, the darkness doesn't retreat quietly. It fights to survive. At that moment, I still didn't know he would come personally to our next service. After that day, something invisible yet undeniable began to move through the village. It wasn't something you could point to. There were no explosions, no dramatic manifestations, but there were small signs at first, and over time they became impossible to ignore. One of the first things I noticed was fire, not the fire of rituals, but the fire of deliverance. One night, A young man came to the church carrying a small cloth bag. His steps were slow, as if every movement required an inner decision. He didn't say a word. He just opened the bag and poured its contents onto the ground. Amulets, cords, small objects wrapped in leather and bones. Objects he had carried since childhood. He looked at me with the eyes of someone crossing an invisible border. I don't want this in my life anymore. There were no claps, no celebration, only silence. We took those objects and burned them right there in front of the church. The fire rose slowly, consuming symbols that had ruled entire generations. In the days that followed, others came. A woman brought a necklace she had inherited from her grandmother. A man brought a small container he had kept buried under his doorway. Every object carried a story, and every story was being surrendered. Darkness doesn't lose territory all at once. It loses territory every time someone decides they no longer belong to it. But it wasn't only objects that disappeared. Illnesses began to disappear too. A child who hadn't spoken since age 3 began to say simple words. A woman, tormented by nightmares, started sleeping through the night for the first time in decades. Men who used to avoid looking each other in the eyes began gathering to pray. The village was changing, and people could feel it. The fear that once ruled conversations began giving way to something new. It wasn't full confidence yet, but it was hope. But every true transformation exposes what was once comfortable staying hidden. And that was when the warning started. First, symbols were drawn on the ground in front of the church, crooked lines made with a dark substance I didn't recognize right away. Then objects began appearing at the doors of the homes of those who attended services. They weren't left by accident, they were messages. One night, I found a small figure made of straw and bones hanging on the church door. Its arms were tied with red rope, and its head tilted to the side, as if it were watching. Some members panicked. "Pastor, this is a warning." Others whispered that it meant we had gone too far, but the moment that changed everything came 2 days later. A boy named Tundu ran up to me as I walked through the village. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "I heard him," he said, trying to catch his breath. "I heard the witch doctor talking with the men near the river. I knelt in front of him." "What did he say?" The boy hesitated, as if repeating those words could bring them to life again. "He said he's coming to the service. He said this time he will step inside the church himself." That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying on my small bed, I listened to the wind passing through the cracks in the wall. Every sound seemed louder than normal. Every shadow seemed closer. My mind tried to find answers, but my spirit already knew. The confrontation was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. Because there comes a moment when faith stops being a silent conviction and becomes a public declaration of war against what once ruled your life. And that Friday night service would be that moment. Let me ask you a question, not as a viewer, but as someone who could have been there. If you were in that service that night and you knew a man who had devoted his life to darkness was coming personally to confront your faith, would you stay or would you leave? The day of the service dawned different. There was no visible sign in the sky. The sun rose like any other morning, lighting the tin roofs and dirt roads with the same golden light as always. Women walked to the well with their buckets. Men went to the fields. Children ran through the narrow streets. But something had changed. It was as if the air was thicker, as if every breath had to push through an invisible resistance before it could reach your lungs. I saw it in people's eyes. Some looked away when I passed. Others stared longer than normal, as if they wanted to say something but didn't have the courage to put it into words. The rumor had spread. He was coming. That afternoon, I sat alone inside the small church. The heat was trapped under the metal roof, making the air heavy and still. The wooden bench under my hands was hot. The silence around me wasn't empty, it was expectant. I closed my eyes and began to pray, not with polished words, not with the confidence I usually carried in front of others, but with honesty. Lord, I know you called me here, but I need you with me now. My voice came out lower than I expected because I don't know what will happen tonight. For a moment, nothing answered. No wind, no feeling, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something I had never fully understood before. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to stay even when fear is the only thing you can feel. When I opened my eyes, the sun was already starting to sink toward the horizon. The light coming through the cracks in the wall had shifted from gold to amber, casting long shadows over the dirt floor. Soon, the first people began to arrive. A woman entered first, gripping her child's hand tightly. Her eyes scanned the inside of the church as if checking whether it was safe to be there. She didn't say anything. She sat on the front bench and kept her head down. Then an elderly man came in. His steps were slow but steady. He didn't look at me when he entered. He only nodded and sat in the back. Others came, some with faith, others with fear. Some I knew came only to witness what would happen, because that night no one was there by accident. We started the service the way we always did. A simple song, no instruments, just voices. At first, the voices were low, hesitant, as if each person was measuring their own courage. But little by little, something began to change. The voices grew, not in volume, but in depth. It was as if each word carried more weight, more intention, more need. I closed my eyes again and let the song cover me, and then I heard it. At first, it was just a distant sound, one step, then another, slow, heavy, outside. The singing began to weaken. A woman stopped completely. A child squeezed his mother's arm. The steps came closer now, the sound of something being dragged over the dirt. And then silence took the place of the music. No one had to say a word. Everyone knew. He had arrived. I stayed standing. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my chest, in my neck, in my hands. Every human instinct in me screamed to run, to hide, to survive. But there was something stronger than instinct, something that didn't shout, but remained. Because there comes a moment when you realize running might save your body, but it will cost your soul. His shadow appeared first, projected at the entrance of the church, tall, still, waiting. And then he stepped inside. He didn't speak right away. He simply entered. His bare feet raised small clouds of dust from the ground as he crossed the doorway. The smell that came with him wasn't sweat or earth. It was something burned, something old, something that didn't belong in that place. In his right hand, he held a small bundle of bones tied with dark thread. Around his neck, cords hung like dead roots. His eyes moved slowly across the church, studying every face, every movement, every breath. No one moved. No one dared. He stopped in the center of the room and tilted his head slightly, like someone evaluating something he already believed belonged to him. "So this is it," he said, his voice low but heavy with authority. "This is where you've been calling something that doesn't belong to this land." My whole body was aware of every heartbeat. The sound felt too loud inside my own chest. I took a step forward, not because I felt strong, but because there was nowhere left to retreat. "This house belongs to God," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. He made a small sound that wasn't exactly a laugh, but close. "Your God doesn't rule here." The words weren't spoken with anger. They were spoken with conviction. And that was what made them more dangerous. Behind me, I heard someone begin to cry softly. A child, the kind of crying that tries not to be heard. The witch doctor slowly raised the hand holding the bones and began to murmur words I didn't recognize. His voice shifted, becoming deeper, more distant, as if he weren't speaking only to us, but to something beyond us. The air inside the church seemed to grow heavier. An invisible pressure formed around all of us. A woman fell to her knees, covering her face. A man began to back away slowly toward the wall. I felt something I had never felt before. It wasn't just fear, it was the sense of being watched by something without a body. My body reacted before my mind could control it. My pulse raced. My breathing turned uneven. For a moment, just one moment, I considered the possibility that he might be right, that maybe that land really belonged to darkness, that maybe I had brought those people into a place where they could not be protected. It's when God's silence seems to agree with him. The witch doctor took one step, then another. Now he was only a few meters from me. His eyes didn't blink. "You opened something you don't understand," he said. My mouth went dry. No answer came, no word, no sign, nothing. The silence stretched, heavy, relentless, and in that silence, something inside me began to break. Not my faith, but my illusion of control. I realized with painful clarity there was nothing I could do in that moment. Nothing human, nothing visible. Nothing I could grab or prove. Everything I had built, everything I believed, stood in front of a force that couldn't be faced with logic or courage. The witch doctor lifted his arm slowly, his lips still moving. Behind me, someone whispered my name. "Pastor?" It wasn't a call of hope. It was a call of goodbye. My whole body trembled, not outwardly, but inside. And in that moment, I understood something I had never understood before. True surrender doesn't happen when you lose. It happens when you realize you never had control to begin with. My legs gave way, not in defeat, but in surrender. I knelt, not because I was sure what God would do, but because I finally accepted that if anything happened, it would not come from me. When my knees touched the ground, the world seemed to stop. There was no thunder, no wind, no light falling from the sky like in the stories I heard as a child. There was only the sound of my own breathing and the crushing weight of silence. I didn't pray out loud. I had no strength for that. My words came out like a broken whisper. "Lord, I'm here. Nothing more. No demands, no speeches, no trying to prove anything, only surrender." Behind me, I could still feel the witch doctor. His presence was like a shadow pressing the air around me. His murmuring continued, low, constant, like someone feeding an invisible flame. Then something changed, not around me, in him. First it was a small pause, almost imperceptible. His murmuring faltered for an instant, like a voice losing balance between two words. I slowly lifted my eyes. He was frozen. His lips were still parted, but no sound came out. His eyes, once filled with unshakable certainty, now moved quickly, like someone searching for something that had vanished. "No," he whispered. His voice had changed. The conviction was gone. Now there was something that hadn't been there before. Confusion. He took a step back. His eyes locked onto me, but he no longer seemed to see me. He seemed to see something behind me, something no one else could see. His fingers opened, and the bones in his hand fell to the ground with a dry sound, the echo cracking the silence inside the church. "Where are you?" he said, his voice trembling. No one answered. He began to turn slowly, his eyes sweeping the space around him. "No, you can't leave. Not now." His body started to shake, not like someone filled with power, but like someone abandoned by it. Because in that moment, the man who entered as authority was being left alone inside his own emptiness. He dropped to his knees, his hands pressed hard into the ground, like he was trying to hold on to something invisible that was slipping away. "Come back!" he shouted, his voice now unrecognizable. "You promised you wouldn't leave me." The desperation in his voice wasn't dramatic. It was real, raw, primitive. The people behind me began to understand. The crying changed. It wasn't fear anymore, it was shock. The witch doctor began shaking his head violently, eyes wide, breathing uneven. "They're gone," he whispered. He looked directly at me, but there was no challenge left in his eyes. There was terror. "They ran when you knelt." His words hung in the air. No one moved. No one dared interrupt the moment, because all of us knew, without needing to say it out loud, that something had happened there, something no man could manufacture, something no one could fake, something that didn't belong to human strength. Power hadn't arrived with noise, it had arrived with authority. The witch doctor backed away slowly, still staring at me like someone who had seen something he couldn't understand. He didn't threaten, he didn't speak again. He stood up and left, without ritual, without authority, without power. The silence he left behind wasn't empty. It was holy. Then one single voice began to sing, low, trembling but alive. Another voice joined, then another, until the entire church was singing, not out of courage but out of witness. 2 days later, he returned, but this time he didn't enter as authority. He entered as a man. His steps were slow, his eyes were different. There were no symbols on his body, no cords, no bones, no protection. Just him. People instinctively moved away. Fear was still present, but he looked at no one except me. His eyes were red, not from anger, but from something deeper. "Since that day," he said, his voice low, "they don't speak to me anymore." He swallowed hard. "They abandoned me." The silence inside the church was absolute. But something has been speaking to me since then. He placed a hand over his chest. Years have passed since that night. The red dirt of that village is still the same. The wind still moves through the fields with the same sound. The trees still cast long shadows at sunset. But something invisible, something essential changed forever. Today, where there used to be silence from fear, there are voices in prayer. Where there used to be blood rituals, there are hands lifted in surrender. Where children used to sleep with their eyes open from anxiety, they now sleep with the peace only God can plant inside the human heart. But if there's one thing I learned that night, it wasn't about the power of darkness. It was about the cost of perseverance, because no one sees the bruised knees of the one who keeps praying when nothing changes. No one sees the silent tears poured out in nights when God feels far away. No one sees the weight a pastor carries when he keeps believing, even when everyone around him has already given up. Most people want to live a revival, but few are willing to live the reform that revival demands. Because revival doesn't start at the altar. Because no one sees the bruised knees of the one who keeps praying when nothing changes. No one sees the silent tears poured out in nights when God feels far away. It starts with the quiet decision to abandon what you know is keeping God from fully dwelling in you. In that village, revival didn't start when the witch doctor fell. It started when a child decided to repeat one Bible verse before going to sleep. It started when a man decided to burn the object he had carried his whole life. It started when ordinary people decided they didn't want to live ruled by fear anymore. The miracle you see is always preceded by a decision no one sees. There are people who say they want God to transform their lives, but they keep feeding the same habits that keep them trapped. They keep cultivating the same thoughts. They keep protecting the same fears. They keep negotiating with what God already told them to abandon. And then they ask why nothing changes. But the truth is simple and confronting. God doesn't live where he is only invited. He lives where he is obeyed. That night when I knelt, I wasn't only facing a man. I was facing everything that tried to convince that community they belonged to darkness. But what I didn't realize was that God had already begun to act long before that confrontation. He had already started working in hearts, in quiet decisions no one celebrated. Because there is no revival without reform, and there is no reform without surrender. The Word of God says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, "If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Notice this. God doesn't start with the territory, he starts with the people, because when the heart surrenders, the territory inevitably changes. Maybe you're listening to me right now, and there is something in your life you know needs to be abandoned. Maybe you're living in an environment where fear feels stronger than hope. Maybe you have prayed, and it seems like nothing has happened. But let me tell you something I learned while kneeling on that red dirt floor. God's silence is never absence, it's preparation. He is watching, he is working, he is waiting for the moment your surrender becomes complete. Because God isn't looking for perfect people. He's looking for available people, people who will stand when it would be easier to run, people who will kneel when the world tells them to retreat. If you feel like something is holding your life spiritually, I want to pray for you now, not as someone distant, but as someone who has stood face to face with something that looked impossible to defeat. Lord God, I don't know the name of every person listening to this prayer right now, but you do. You know their silent nights. You know the fears they have never confessed to anyone. You know the battles they face inside their own minds. Father, just as you entered that village and broke what seemed unbreakable, enter this person's life now. Where there is fear, plant peace. Where there is oppression, establish freedom. If this testimony spoke to you, subscribe to this channel, because some stories are not told just to be heard. They are told to awaken something inside you. Leave your like and write in the comments, I choose to remain. And speaking of never being the same, on the next video, you will see the testimony of a missionary in Mexico who was thrown out of a plane by a cartel. But something appeared in the sky that night, something no one could explain. And it proved there are places where not even death gets the final word. That story will impact you and strengthen your faith. God bless you, and I'll see you in our next one.